So my name is Brian Carroll. I'm the treasurer of the board at the Vermont Production Collective. And if you don't know what that is, there's these little handouts on your table. We're a nonprofit that essentially seeks to continue building the community that already exists here in Vermont around film and creative media, but also kind of pave the way for the future to ensure that there's a sustainable economy around it. People can stay here, live here, make films, and have an income actually doing so. So we're doing a lot of work with the legislator, also partnering with wonderful places like JAM and hosting events like this, community building aspects and things like that. So I'm also a huge horror nerd and probably have been for entirely too young in my lifetime. I saw some movies on cable access or cable back in the day when they would show that more frequently than they do today. So that's why I invited two of my favorite horror filmmakers here today. They have had films shown at, and I could go on for the next hour, probably listing off their accolades, but Fantastic Fest, Etheria, here in Vermont, Green Mountain Film Festival. They also won the Best Vermont Short at the Vermont Film and Folklore Festival recently. Salem Horror Fest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And their last film is one that both my wife and I, after we watched it, we looked at each other and just went, oh, yes, that. So I will let you guys introduce yourselves, talk about your company, I guess you would call it, right? And kind of what you do and your connection to film here in Vermont.
I'm Sean Temple.
I'm Sarah Wisner.
We grew up in Vermont, loving horror movies, and I don't know what to say. What should we say?
We so far we've made six short films, mostly in the horror genre space. We lived in LA for a while, moved back to Vermont because this is the place to be. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
And just, I guess, in terms of like your partnership and how a film comes to creation, between how the dynamic between how you two work together. I know you both dabble in, like so many filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers, dabble in a bit of all of it. But how does it typically work for you both? Well,
my background is in writing and screenwriting, and Sean's background is more in the media component and directing. So our collaboration kind of started out in that vein, and then I kind of grew into the directing part. And so now we co-write and we co-direct. And
sometimes.
We co-produce, and that kind of, those roles shift depending on the project.
A lot of times Sarah will write and we'll co-direct, and sometimes we co-write. And even when Sarah's the only writer, it's very collaborative early in the process. Like, I'm maybe not writing story with her, but I'm throwing out visual ideas that she's incorporating into the script and putting them in a way that doesn't feel like it's just a visual idea. It feels motivated in the story and the characters.
Sean is also our editor. So
Edit.
Okay, so here's a very simple question with probably a very complex answer. You have a background, like, you learned how to direct a film. You know how to write a script. Why horror?
Well, I really loved horror growing up. I definitely saw Halloween way too early and had nightmares for like my whole childhood of being chased by Michael Myers. Luckily, I could jump hundreds of feet through the air to get away in my dreams. And I think we get asked that question a lot, and it's helped us think of like more consciously about our subconscious feelings. I think as horror audience members, we love being scared in a like safe environment, getting that adrenaline and just having that kind of fear. But when it comes to actually making our movies, you want to talk a little bit about that, or you want me to keep going?
You can keep going.
Yeah. Well, when we met, I didn't make horror films because I was convinced by my film school professors that I shouldn't. But when I met Sarah, she was a genre storyteller who wanted to tell her stories through metaphor and genre, and that really connected with me and got me back into horror filmmaking, and that's definitely kind of why we make horror films. It allows us to tell really maybe sometimes bleak, dark stories in a way that's a little more digestible, and it allows us to heighten themes and character motivations and anxieties through genre storytelling.
Yeah, I would say I also came to horror from a young age. I was a big fan of The X-Files as like a middle schooler, which can be a little bit formative. And yeah, I've always connected with kind of genre stories more so than straightforward stories. I'm fascinated by how you can use metaphor and world building in such creative ways to examine like really personal problems. So that's kind of what I'm drawn to as a storyteller.
And then as directors, it's just, it's probably the most fun genre to play in.
It's so fun.
It requires real like cinematic storytelling. You can get away with like just like medium close-ups of characters talking in dramas, but you can't get away with that in horror. You have to like heighten what you're trying to imply through cinematic language. So it's really fun as a filmmaker to work in horror and to find different ways to scare people or just create dread and all the different emotions you can create.
And that's a wonderful segue. I also want to say, like, I'd love this to be an open discussion as well. So if you have any questions for Sean and Sarah as we go. Oh, okay. Question from the back.
Why did your film school professors tell you to stay away from horror?
I think there is a general like either misconception or thinking like looking down on genre and horror, especially maybe in like film school settings where like everyone that is being referenced in film school settings is really like classic European like art house cinema, and this is personal. This teacher just really loved like dramas. That's just like what they thought was like worth making. Those are the kinds of stories they like. So ultimately, they just had like a very narrow vision of what cinema should be to them, and they kind of put that on their students.
Did folks here have a film school background or not so much? Yeah. So I don't know if maybe you encountered this as well, but it's in some film school spaces, there's a kind of lowbrow, highbrow division, and some professors kind of embrace the lowbrow and they dive into that and examine it and unpack it, and that's really fun. And some professors are more drawn to the highbrow, like there's one right way to do art. And genre filmmaking is not art, it's schlock or whatever, it's money making. And obviously we don't feel that way, but it is kind of an attitude that you might encounter in those spaces sometimes.
We had a hard time imagining how it could be really personal, but it's very, very personal. Yeah.
So I guess talking about the importance of story kind of over everything else, I'm going to make this as PG as possible, but I've heard the film Prometheus referred to as the most beautifully shot dumpster fire ever put on film. I don't necessarily agree with that, but like you can make something that's absolutely stunningly beautiful, but if there's no story that people can connect to, it's kind of like, meh, what's the point, right? Mm-hmm. So from your point of view, I know like Water Horse was born out of one of your nightmares, mm-hmm. and then your most recent film, The Thaw, was, you know, the origin material was an old folktale from Vermont. So for you, what does your process look like in terms of where do you start with the story? How do you guys kind of spitball back and forth and come up with your ideas for films?
Me?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's hard.
So hard to articulate. It's such a kind of like, subconscious.
Yeah, I think different films come from different places, and I think sometimes it can be like a visual that inspires a feeling that you want to build a story around. Sometimes it can be
like we had our first movie we made together. Sarah had this image of a woman like submerged underwater, like you think she's dead, and then she gets up, and that was the beginning of a vampire movie that we made. Sorry to interrupt. Just use the example.
So for me, writing in the horror space, it's really comes down to being willing to examine what scares you, which is not always the easiest thing to do. So Water Horse, for example, the movie that was inspired by a nightmare that I had. In that instance, we actually had a very different, more traditional story idea for a short film. That was, two characters in a house, which is a great starting place if you're on a budget. But that
which also turned into not a budget.
That idea was really interested in kind of transformation and the home space and pregnancy and renovation. And so budgetary-wise, became much larger than the 2 characters in a house idea that we originally started with. So we pivoted to the nightmare because we thought it would be more affordable to film. So it's
Which also didn't end up being true.
which also didn't end up being true. Filmmaking is expensive, y'all. But so those 2 germs of story ideas came from very different places, and so it's kind of a matter of finding what feels right to you, to the story that you feel like is the next thing you want to devote your time and energy to, and what's like feasible with the resources that you have.
I think there are a lot of
factors.
Stories start with like a kind of very general concept, and then we're pretty confident in like the concept and finding scares within it, but we start more concentrating on the characters and trying to stay character driven, and always looking for like a story within that scary premise that could work without the genre elements, so that it is more of a like strong story that the genre is just elevating versus only leaning on like the horror of it all.
Yeah.
So that, because all those characters and the way you feel about them, you're gonna feel more scared if you like care about the people that you're watching and that kind of stuff.
Yep. I don't know if that really answers
No,
the
it does.
question.
Well, I think it leads to something that we were in a conversation at Green Mountain Film Festival a number of months ago, and Sean said something fairly profound about using filmmaking as like a machine for empathy so how important is that for you in terms of making characters that people can relate to, or having themes that are kind of applicable to people that they can say, okay, no, I actually care about this story.
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
That part's much harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something I really, really strongly believe in, that like cinema, as much as any, if not more, I'm biased because I'm a filmmaker and I love cinema, but I just think being able to like visually put an audience in the mind of a character, and then also getting to see their face and their emotions, it leaves extra room for the audience to bring their own lives to it, in my opinion, versus like reading a book where you're reading all the internal monologue and you're getting all the little things, and you're watching a movie, you're forced to watch a person, which is a little more like life, and hopefully it pushes you to like think about how this person's feeling and have empathy for them, instead of like just like sympathizing with their situation. You're kind of putting yourself in the shoes of that character, which I think is strong skills to have that bring into your life.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a big reader, so I find this to be true with books as well.
Yeah.
But I think with good art, when it forces you to kind of have an internal conversation with what you're watching or reading, and when you do that, when you're bringing yourself to that story, it creates a relationship, a dialogue with what you're watching or reading, that can be very expansive and allow you to think in new ways and put yourself in someone else's shoes in a way that can generate that ability to relate to someone who's experiencing something maybe that you've never experienced before, but you can suddenly imagine how you would feel going through something like that. Yeah, and I think it's kind of so key to the space that we're in now, where things feel so divided and divisive and insular, and we're living in these bubbles that are kind of created by the media that we expose ourselves to. And if you can kind of break out of that bubble a little bit, it helps form those connections that allow for things not to be so polarized. Which, horror films, yes, that's what we do.
All right, so I'm going to play a clip quick, or 2 clips, world building stuff, from 2 of your films, just real quickly.
Which 2 again?
First one.
World building, I like that.
It's very horror-y,
Yeah.
right? Little wiggly.
Very little Thaw.
So with the introduction, and then also
Cool.
one from Esther and Sydney when they're in the house.
How is it like working with animal actors?
This sheep is the best actor we've worked with. I'm exaggerating. No, he was super easy. Our approach to animals and children, also we've worked with children, is the more you try to control what they're supposed to do, the harder you're going to make life for yourself. So if you can devise shots and scenes where you're more capturing what that being would naturally do in that situation, you'll set yourself up for better success.
Which, when we get to watch that shot, we very
the
much...
sheep just did what he was going to do.
And
it was
we
great.
just put them in an area where they'd be in the camera, and we'd be okay with anything it did. Yeah.
Timothy, it's Ruth.
Oh, my dear. Why are you home?
Half a barrel of crab apples,
5 pounds oats,
1 can of butter, 1 of jam,
2 blocks cheddar.
1 sack of potatoes.
You and Ruth will thin out for sure, but if you ration careful, you make it through.
You know this to be false.
I can risk my own well-being, but I will not risk yours as well.
I will not lose another child.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm gonna go check outside.
Right. So I guess in terms, I purposely used 2 different house clips for this, but in terms of how you are creating this world, specifically in the Thaw, where I'm going to quote Robert Eggers here, a musty, dusty, rusty kind of a vibe. It's very it pulls you in. You feel a part of that world. Like when I watch that clip and that film in general, I believe that I am there. So to create that world versus the world in Astor and Sydney, where the writing is literally on the wall, something is very wrong, something is going wrong in the world. How much of that is written into your scripts? How much of that is set deck? How much of that is, oh no, we just found this house that actually was in kind of a state of disarray, and creating this really immersive kind of experience for an audience?
Well, production design is kind of one of my favorite, there's so many favorites, but it's one of my favorite things to use to tell a story and build a world. I think it's so crucial that what you see in every part of the frame is serving your story in some way. And so part of that, when you are working on a budget and you don't have full control over whatever space you're going to be filming in, is choosing the right space. And so both of these houses, we kind of lucked out. The Thaw house is owned by a couple in Stowe who have kind of made it their life project to construct their family home in this historical way. Scott, the homeowner, his profession is in historic building techniques, and he worked for Shelburne Museum and stuff like that. So he, as a side project, acquired 3 different historic houses around New England, dismantled them, labeled every piece, transported them to their land, and reconstructed them into a single home, utilizing the techniques of the period. So the house that we filmed in is 3 different houses, and you see 2 different houses, or 3 different houses in one, and you see 2 different parts of that. And so one is from the 1700s, and one is from the 1800s. And everything Scott did when creating this house was in service of preserving that historic quality. So when you're creating a period piece, and you're looking at like Airbnb listings around Vermont, you see a lot of lovely, 19th century farmhouses that would have been perfect until you, click through the photos and get to the kitchen. And it's this lovely, modern, updated, beautiful kitchen that just isn't ever gonna work for a period piece like this. So the fact that they had this beautiful, very historical space kind of, in a way, ready to go as a starting place was huge for us, and the fact that they were also really, really accommodating with rearranging and helping us decorate and having ideas and having all this stuff that they were happy to have us use for the film really lent itself to building this world. I put a lot of work into it, so I'm glad that you like it.
Can you go back to the opening shot really quickly? I just want to talk through a couple of things. It's when the doors open.
I'm going to pause it or just play it?
You can pause it.
I was gonna.
It's kind of a static shot.
Oh,
There's sound.
Okay. Once that walks in. Okay, I'll pause it. So, walks in the way. But all the different things that we're trying to do in this shot, which is the first shot of the movie, conveying so many things about the movie, is creating the relationship between light and darkness. That's going to be a motif that keeps coming into this movie, and we're really showing the difference in their relationships by having them together and him separate, kind of overseeing and putting them in this frame. And the frame kind of implies how they're maybe trapped in this dire situation. We have this horseshoe in the top left, which is a magic motif. We have all these different instruments from the time. We have this room that's being hidden right now. But it's just trying to pack as much visual information in as possible in this opening shot to convey everything about what this movie is going to kind of be about thematically, and placing us in a time, their costumes, all that kind of stuff. Just feel like talking about that.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly important when you're working within the parameters of 15, 17 minutes, whatever it may be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The scene after this that we didn't hear is all about them checking how much food they have in their stores, in the root cellar, which this movie is a little bit front-loaded with some expository dialogue because of our time constraints. We would love to convey everything visually, but when you're making short films, you kind of have to find that balance between saying something so your audience can understand and trying to tell as much of it visually. We actually, after we saw the first Dune, kind of felt like we're on the right path because that movie front-loaded so much expository dialogue up front, but then you just go and you're with the rest of the movie, and I kind of think that's what we do in this movie by giving that little bit of information up front so you can just be on the journey after.
With Astor and Sydney, with the post-apocalyptic one, we also utilized a house that was relatively close to what we needed to begin with. It was
Someone had to suddenly leave their...
an abandoned space that was occupied by someone who was in a difficult situation, unfortunately. But it worked out for us. In terms of the spray paint on the wall, I was not there for this shoot. I might have made some different choices if I had been. But I think it turned out well.
I think both those situations we had an idea needed to create an environment that can imply a very different world than our own, and then worked our butts off to try to find a way to pull it off. So you said luck, but we put a lot of work into finding those locations.
Yeah.
But it's easy to imagine the movie not really working out if we couldn't have found them. So.
I keep wondering if they got the tree to frame itself so well in that door frame, because trees are rarely planted right in front of a door.
Yeah, this is Actually, they're not the front door of their actual house. This is like it's a, I don't know how to
Doesn't really
describe it.
matter.
There's like an L shape to the house. And so this is actually in more of that courtyard side door situation, and the front is on the far side of the structure. So we used their side door to play as our front door for the film.
We didn't love that tree. We thought about VFXing it out. We actually,
There is actually a fair amount of VFX on this shot.
yeah,
And the tree was a little more scraggly, right?
and like on their head, like right above their heads and stuff.
we-
So that was
yeah.
part of the reason we didn't like it, and then we found how to shorten the sticks
Yeah.
to make it feel a little more framed.
Yep. Question?
I'm just curious, how does the unknown or like the lack of information in the character situation affect the mood and tension in building up horror and terror?
Yeah, I think there's a balance to kind of feeding your audience what you need them to know for each given moment. And I think despite the fact that this film does have a fair amount of exposition at the front, I think we were also pretty careful and choosy about how that information was delivered because we knew we needed to parcel some of it out.
Yeah, it's the information at the beginning of this movie is more character information, but how the whole point of this movie is this family is taking, they don't have enough resources to survive the winter, so they're going to take the sleeping tea to freeze the parents over the winter to be thawed out in the spring, which is based on a Vermont folklore, and how that kind of magic works is pretty ambiguous and left to the audience because it really represents what Ruth knows about it, and she's trying to learn the process from her parents and then do it. So there's in the second half of the movie, when all the like wild horror-y stuff starts happening, there is a lot of uncertainty about like why, and that's to also show like the characters not knowing either.
Yeah, if you can kind of put yourself in the viewpoint of a character who doesn't know everything about what they're experiencing, then the audience can kind of go on that journey with them, which is what this film kind of tries to do. But if you don't give enough, you're going to lose the audience if they feel like they really don't know what's going on.
But every audience is different, and I think our approach is always treat yourself as the audience and do what you like, and that there will always be people that like the same kind of things that you like, and you can't like make something for everyone.
That's what you're making it for, is for the people who like what you like.
Yeah.
And if some folks miss some things, that's okay.
No one's gonna
Better
get
than
it.
spoon feeding, in my opinion.
So just another clip to kind of guide us along here. So I want to pause it there because, like, you talked before about film school, and this is like reads very Bergman-esque to me, and I feel like this is like a 2-second clip where Ruth or Emily pops up, but you could pause any frame, and everyone, her face reads something different, like terror, confusion, all these different things. So in terms of, I think quite a few of your films make good use of aspect ratio for things like claustrophobia or reading exteriors with trees being taller than they are. And then like this clip in particular, a good use of establishing wides and then extreme close-ups and medium zooms and things like that. So can you just talk a little about using the language of the camera to kind of portray the different feelings that you're trying to evoke in an audience?
It really depends on like what we're trying to convey or evoke in each given moment. But the house is really important to see the house at night and see all the snow, which doesn't come across in this viewing experience. I don't really know. It can be hard to articulate like things you've been thinking about so intensely for a long time. I know with a lot of what we were just trying to, I don't know. I have nothing to say about that.
Okay. Well, the zooms are something that I think you can.
Yeah,
talk
but I
about.
wouldn't say these are the zoomiest of shots.
Do you want to face forward, maybe?
I don't
so
know.
people can hear you?
I don't feel like I have anything to say about it.
Okay. Well, in terms of aspect ratio, we tend to gravitate towards a boxier aspect ratio for a number of reasons. I think for me, I come back to Meek's cutoff for my reasoning. I think for you, it comes from a different place. But if anyone knows the Kelly Reichardt film Meek's Cutoff, it's kind of it's a great film, highly recommend. But it's kind of conceived of as an anti-Western. So it's a like group of pioneers traveling across this kind of familiar Western landscape, big open plains, big open sky, and I think we're used to seeing those kinds of spaces conveyed in a really widescreen format where it's like a vista and a horizon and it's all open and it's about like exploration and individualism. And so her film is kind of telling the story of this group of travelers from the women's perspective in that space, and they're being kind of led astray by some men, some men folk. And that film is 4:3, correct? And so to have that kind of familiar visual space represented in an unfamiliar way that's inspired by the bonnets that the women were wearing that kind of blocks their vision and narrows their vision into this kind of more domestic field. I really love that dichotomy and that language, and I think it works really well for conveying that sense of domestic claustrophobia in a way. So for Ruth in this space, that's both so closed in and also so open and terrifying. The aspect ratio lent itself to that for me. Like Brian mentioned, the tall trees and that kind of oppressive downward feeling.
Robert Eggers wanted to film The Witch in 4:3, but didn't have like the financial backing to do it because it's not as accessible to a wider theatrical release. And what Sarah talked about is just like it's a really, with Meek's Cutoff and a little bit with us, it's really a combination of like the creative side and also logistical, practical side. So for like us, 4:3 helps convey older time periods just like right away. That was a big reason to do it. Beyond that, we do 4:3 a lot. Water Horse, which I think we'll see clips of later. A big reason we chose 4:3 for that movie is that we shot on a lake house, and we wanted the lake house to feel more isolated, and there was more houses nearby. So if we had a more boxy frame, we could have an easier time framing out those houses. Like that was like a purely practical reason we did it. And then like creatively, it was a very dreamy kind of movie that was like kind of had a nostalgic feel, and we were leaning into like more like 8mm home movie kind of summer feelings with that. And then it's always about like trapping is a big part of it when we use 4:3, and then also it's kind of the opposite, but same idea of like a 2-3-5, like Halloween, where like you're always looking in the background. Hopefully, in that movie trains you to look in the background. Same with It Follows. This we're trying to like make you think about and worry about what's off screen, especially in Astor and Sydney. The whole idea of like around any corner there could be like danger was something we were really interested in. So we wanted to kind of convey that idea by like limiting what you could see, because maybe that turn, that pan might result in something bad happening.
Yeah, build that dread. And I think we do the zooms for a similar reason, like the building tension through feeling like something is encroaching on the character, on the viewer. Something approaching that you can't control, I think is very dreadful.
And it's different, at least for me, than like a dolly push-in, where like the dolly kind of implies a little more objective because the camera is literally moving, so you kind of maybe feel like someone is moving closer, where the zoom is more subjective because you're just like pushing and it's not natural, right? Like how a zooming mechanism works. So there's not literally someone getting closer, it's implying that something is like coming close. Like, I don't know, how else do I say that?
No, I think
They're not moving closer physically, they're like getting closer emotionally.
You guys are killing it with the segues here. 'Cause if we can all be,
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
How often are you thinking that detailed about a shot versus just, it looks good?
Yeah.
Always.
Like, you are always thinking that detailed about every
Yeah.
shot.
The vast majority, I would say, of our, well, maybe not vast majority, but the majority of our filmmaking takes place in pre-production, I would say. We do so much planning.
Especially because we are directors together. So
We
we have
to know
we have to
what
spend
we're going for.
a lot of time finding out where we agreed like 90% of the time. Because we're really almost the same person a little bit, and we have very similar sensibilities. But we don't agree on everything. Sometimes we'll find out we have a completely different interpretation of a character motivation, even though we co-wrote the scene together. So like we have to figure that out and figure out who's right. It's usually her. So yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about like what we want the shot to look like and like what it's implying. Yeah, because that's really, every shot builds and builds, and you have so much time to like plan it out with your collaborators that like it's almost impossible like not to like try to find like the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
For us at least.
There's a lot that goes into similar to the production design of like every object that's in the frame is part of telling the story. It's every approach to how you're framing it is also telling the story. And so to think deeply about each shot, what it's doing for you, what it's doing for the story, for the character, I think is really key, especially, I mean, I would say that's always true in visual storytelling, always true.
Doesn't mean
but
we
especially
pull
in
out.
short films,
Yeah.
because you only have so much time to work with.
And that doesn't mean that like sometimes we have an idea that just feels cool, and we sometimes will just do that, but then we kind of usually figure out after the fact what like
Why it felt right.
what
it's
in our gut was like telling us to do that or something like that.
This is maybe my favorite shot, by the way. Thanks for
It
showing it.
really is. Similarly, I think there's something to be said about auditory cues as well for building tension, which if we all be very, very quiet,
You can almost
we
hear
can
it.
almost hear.
Whose do you think it is?
I don't know. The Hendersons, maybe? Better go call around.
Water in the tube? No? Dill? Dylan!
Anyway, so there's like a string where they're slow zooming into the trees, and then again here, and then that motif kind of repeats itself a few times throughout. This particular says water horse, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. I think of like the mouth clicking in Hereditary, or the theme in Jaws, or the theme in Halloween, as we had mentioned Halloween earlier. I guess for you using auditory signals as well, and more so using them in a way where they don't release every single time for building tension. Can you talk a little bit about how you've used that in the past, maybe? Or in some instances, like we're talking about sound, not using any sound except for the natural sound of the woods or the basement and safe and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I sound design a lot of movies, as much as like probably like 80 to 90% of it. And then we have the budget to then bring in like a final mixer and who can basically, I create the foundation and then they can elevate it for us. Whether we have music or not, my approach, I did trailer editing when I lived in LA, so that was like, so much of trailer editing is really just sound design and like building a sound bed that you just kind of throw random images on, which helped me kind of improve as a sound designer and then bring it into our filmmaking, especially with this movie. It was the first movie I made after being a trailer editor. And for me, when I see kind of like, especially short films, it's like a lot of short films are mostly just the visual and maybe like they have like good music and stuff, but they're not using sound to like heighten like every single moment. There's so many little tiny things you can do to like elevate a moment just by like throwing a crow cawing over here. Or, like I try to approach it almost like music. So the sound design for Aster and Sydney was like trying to create a score without score in my mind. But it's a lot of, I would say, when it comes to music, we're usually trying to like fix our mistakes and make things feel a little stronger than maybe they were just purely visually. It's like if you watch a movie without the sound or the music, it like falls apart.
Especially horror. I feel
Especially
like.
horror, yeah.
A lot of the time when I was a kid, if something was scaring me too much, I would mute it, and then I could handle it. And that kind of tells you how important sound is to film.
And and then you want to have your moments that are silent have impact by
Contrast.
Yeah, that contrast. Like, don't really know what I'm saying at this moment, but
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's something that something that a lot of filmmakers just starting out will miss is the sound element and how important that is. I would just recommend not forgetting that.
Do you ever do the opposite? Like, there's this great video on YouTube about Mickey Mousing in The Shining, and like using like the opposite instead of like using a crow as like music, like using music as like a crow, like a string swell as like a replacement for like an actual sound to kind of like heighten things. Do you guys ever utilize that?
Probably.
Yeah, maybe not consciously, but probably.
I don't know I can't think necessarily of like replacing like a natural sound, but like choosing whether to use music or a sound effect and which is like the best way to heighten that moment is definitely something we're thinking about a lot, or in conjunction. Like there's a moment in the Thaw, a pretty intense moment that has like a lot of birds cawing with the rising sound at the same time, just to like create maximum kind of like intensity for this kind of moment. They definitely wiggle in and out of each other. I personally, before, I think this might be helpful, before we start having like our composers start doing music, I try to like do as much sound design as possible with the idea that there would be no music, just to make sure the movie can work without it. And that way, once we bring in the music, it's interacting with the sound versus like these two separate things happening simultaneously that don't work together and then have to be readjusted. I think that's really helpful for filmmaking on a budget, because a lot of times I think a lot of us don't have the time to like do this these things simultaneously and then spend the time to figure out how we have to like redo them. We kind of have to do the steps in a more concise, efficient way. I'm rambling now, but no. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess in the nature of efficiency, like, do you get most of the sounds, like wild sounds, like when you're during production, or do you do it mostly in dubbing and post?
It's basically all in post. Yeah. Yeah. It's like it's just you don't have the time on set usually to like stop and get all like the good sounds. Because you're just always like moving forward. There was a time in Aster and Sydney where we lost the first day and a half of sound. The files got corrupted. So that was fun. So we did spend half a day recreating all those scenes just audibly with like the mic and everything. And that was kind of fun. We ended up getting the sound back, so it didn't end up being a big deal. Yeah, generally it's all in post, and it's usually like looking through sound libraries and finding people that have like better audio recording skills than like myself, and then just like layering and layering and layering and layering. Like I never use just one like woods sound effects. I'm usually using like 5 simultaneously to like create this idea of all of the sound from there, all coming together to create one kind of bigger foundation of sound. If that makes sense,
Yeah.
That's like my approach.
Do you Foley ever, or like how often?
We do Foley. Yeah, some stuff you just can't find a good version of it online. I can't remember specifically with anything for the Thaw. There's and that's the kind of thing that once you have the time, the budget to like have someone else do, that's like their job. They're gonna do it so much better. Do we have the window fight in? There's a scene in Water Horse that's shot through a window of this like fight scene between the monster of that movie and the main character, and like I did some like Foleying and finding sounds, but then they like did real Foleying and real sounds and like brought it to a whole other level that I couldn't have pulled off on my own. So I mean, like even in Hollywood movies, like 90% of the dialogue is recorded after the fact because it's so hard to get actual good sound, and they have the time and resources to have the actors sit in that studio and say all their lines over again so they can get like it perfectly. But yeah, a lot of it is always going to be in post-production, and that's good because then you can get. It's hard to know exactly what the sound should be until you're kind of more done. So you're usually doing it after the fact anyways. You want to do as little work as possible, so you usually wait until things are so finalized that like you're not doing extra work that might not end up being useful.
Don't do sound before you're picture locked kind of thing.
At the same time,
Don't do too much
I
sound.
actually do a lot of sound
Yeah.
before I'm picture locked.
To know what
As
works.
I'm contrasting exactly what I just said. Yeah, because I definitely need. There's some people that would like get picture locked without doing any sound design and then hand it off. But I usually need to like understand if it's working with sound before I feel comfortable to be locked. Does that make sense? But it's all personal. It's there's no one way to do anything. It's all up to you and your collaborators and what works for you.
Yeah, we probably should have said that at the top. This is how we do things. It's not how you have to do things.
So I've kind of fanboyed out on the Thaw a lot, which is obviously a black and white film, but I want to talk about maybe the importance of color as well for emoting themes, and probably some of the most obvious examples are like the 60s and 70s with Giallo, Argento, Fulci. Suspiria is always one that kind of comes to the top. You guys use it particularly well in your earlier films, right? Which was Thorns was.
I wish I could say it's one of her.
Yeah.
It's
Nope,
the movie
Thorns
we
came
made
after
before
Water
Thaw.
Horse.
The
Yeah.
Thaw? Oh,
Yeah.
why
Before the
didn't I
Thaw.
do it?
Because
'Cause
I
it's
said
not
it
as
in the bottom of the order.
That I think was trying to use red as an example of like there's something looming, there's some sort of a danger. We don't really know what's going on. Where I think red to a lot of people probably signifies that kind of either passion or danger, or fire is red or orange or sometimes blue. But then this is a later clip where it's kind of the culmination of everything from the film, and there's much more of this like blue, pale kind of.
This will be a fun conversation.
Yep.
This is not the original intention.
Well, then that probably goes back to interpretation, right? Whereas your intention was slightly different than the audience members.
This movie, we were kind of like leaning into a more, I don't know, like, it's more of a slasher film. It's based on more of like urban legends and stuff. It's not as like serious as some of our other movies. So we kind of decided to lean into like some kind of like campier kind of feelings of it. So like having that really intense red is like a pretty like normal kind of way of doing things, but it's so visually interesting and has that impact, just like you're saying. People generally already know how that color kind of like makes them feel, so we just leaned into it. The end was really supposed to be at night. It wasn't supposed to be blue, but we only had a night to shoot that movie, and we lost 2 hours to a lightning rainstorm that came out of nowhere. So on the fly, we had to rearrange our whole schedule because we realized we weren't going to be able to shoot it all at night, and it made sense that the ending had to be at dawn.
If we were gonna have to shoot at dawn,
something was going to have to be at dawn, and it made sense for them to leave at dawn. So all of that was really on the fly, and like it needed to be blue to feel like dawn, and to match that kind of like more neon, like neon-y kind of intense color palette that we had already kind of like fit with that movie. So that was one of those, like, I wouldn't say there was like the most like creative thought of executing it, because we were just trying to figure something out in the fly, which is going to happen all the time.
Right.
Nothing goes right. So a lot of filmmaking is in the moment trying to think of the best thing that your gut is telling you to do in maybe not the most like ideal circumstances laid before you. Yeah. The question about like planning everything so much ahead of time, we do that so that we have that foundation, so that we have a comfort to then pivot or change our minds in the moment.
filmmaking is problem solving, just the whole
So
time.
you're saying you want to kind of slasher film to a dark and stormy night?
Yep. Yep. When you're filming in a parking lot in Atlanta and there's thunder and lightning.
And then the red light was also just a really practical way to give that motel just a different vibe. Because it just looked like a normal motel, and adding those red LED tube lights, it looked just like a scary...
Like a scary place.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to pull over. Any more we should say about color? I kind of want to talk about color with the Thaw, actually, because even though it is black and white, there's still like, you're still thinking about color and for the overall look of the film, and our cinematographer and colorist worked really hard on how they wanted to color the film to give it a kind of period feel. They were really inspired by like silver plate, nitrate photography.
Wet plate photography.
Wet plate photography from the time period to kind of evoke those period impressions through color. Even though
you guys shot Alexa for that?
Yep, and we shot in color. And we knew we wanted to be black and white from the beginning, because we really, like I was talking about, the opening scene was contrasting that light and darkness, and we really wanted to contrast the snowy exteriors to the very dark, shadowy interiors. And that was a way to like really push that idea. And then it's just like the kind of practical reasons, like when we talked about 4:3, conveying time period and the past right away, obviously black and white does that. And then like we didn't have the control of like changing the colors in the house, so we wouldn't have been able to like create a unified color palette if we shot in color. So our budget didn't allow that, so that was like another just like practical reason to go into it. So it's always that combination of creative side, the practical side, finding the best solution for what we want to execute and achieve. Yeah. If we do a feature Thaw, it'll be in color though, because we missed the fire.
The fire.
Yep. Because the fire of the kerosene lamps are so pretty, and there's, we've like looked at the color version with a little bit of like LUTs on it. It's like, oh, that would have been so good, but.
Yep.
And then
we watched There Will Be Blood
We're
before
like,
we filmed, and we were like, the color.
Do we go back to color? And we thought about it, but it wouldn't have worked within our budget, so we committed to our original idea.
So I think the last kind of general topic I want to talk about, which is very pertinent to being here at JAM and with the horror short competition later this month is like budgeting and working on an extremely tight budget and also within a very defined period of time. And I think you alluded to this a little bit before about like planning before you get a camera in your hands.
Yeah.
Do you guys storyboard?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not fancy.
Yeah.
We're not. Can't draw.
Yeah. Storyboard, but really, like we have this document that I call it Shot Bible. That is just like every shot of the movie with like really intense details of like what the composition is, why it's doing that, how the characters are moving, the blocking.
And it'll include a visual if we have one, like a shot like this.
Yeah, or the storyboard that we drew. It's like I think the Thaw is like 300 pages.
Particular software you use for that?
Google Docs?
I actually use Pages.
You use Pages?
Yeah,
for it?
I mean it's really like that version for me is just like the kind of like format is like the shot name, a picture, and then all the different categories of information that I like shot, size, lens, camera movement, zoom or not, handheld, like all that. It's just like everything that I'm seeing.
And a line of like what the action is.
Yes, what's happening, what is in that shot. And that's like just the super big detailed one that then gets funneled into a shot list, which is just like the much simpler version of like, it's this shot, it's this size, and we use that to schedule. But what was the original question?
Shooting on a budget.
Oh yeah.
Which we do have a clip for if you want to watch that
Yeah.
first. So we're using Safe as kind of the example because I think it hits on a lot of the aspects of how you would
Yeah.
be
Let's
able
do
to
it.
shoot on a budget, very tight budget. The first being,
This is the second movie we ever made together, and it's the prequel to Astor and Sydney, which was seeing if we could pull off something that felt like a post-apocalypse with no money.
so yeah.
Did you see that at all? Sorry.
It was in a very dark basement with a flashlight
Yep.
and one cast member. So I guess that's the setup kind of to talk about, especially for something that you're doing on no budget really. What do you all do to try to still make a successful film, but do so in such parameters?
Well, I think this short is one of my favorite things we've ever made. I think partly because creatively we were working under such tight constraints, and I was really happy with how it turned out. And I think the thing about this one for me that lent itself to those parameters was that we really tried to control so many aspects of it. It's the one location, the dark space, so you don't necessarily have to worry a lot about what else might be down there. Having the really limited lights, really the flashlight. There are 2 different flashlights that feature in the film, and we didn't use much else in terms of lighting it.
Yeah, Sarah wrote it, and I'm like, oh, so this whole thing's lit with just flashlights. Cool.
So this kind of leaning
Let's do
into
it.
to your limitations, I think, can be really cool, and having it be just there's just the 2 characters in this one space, and that's kind of, you know, the go-to recommendation for shooting on a budget is if you can have 2 characters in one location, it's going to make your life a lot easier. I don't know, what else do you want to say?
Well, we made this movie for like $200. It was just for a class project. I think the only money we really spent is we rented 1 lens and bought pizza. But that's relative. It's in film school, so lots of like the camera was free and other things were free. But it was something that we could do with a 4-person crew. It was just me and a sound person, DP / I helped DP basically, and Sarah was kind of like everything. That was before Sarah was directing. Probably a lot of PD that I don't even remember at this point.
Yeah.
But it was like,
I directed 1 shot.
yeah. Part of why that worked was the commitment to basically just using the flashlight as the lighting source. Once you like start needing more film lights, more like big film lights, then your crew starts getting bigger and bigger because you need people to physically move those things around. So being able to like do something that really relies more on like practical lights, whether that's like windows or lamps in your house, like basically trying to find like soft, natural light that digital cameras can handle well, because digital cameras don't handle like hard light very well unless you're really lighting it properly. So it's like that combination of finding the location that has some of those things, and like Sarah was saying, location that can do a lot of the production design heavy lifting for you, because you probably won't have the people that you can have come in and pay to like set something up for a month like we did with the Thaw. We were doing that every weekend for a month to get that location set up. This, we basically just walked down into our basement and practically just filmed.
Went from there.
For some reason, someone had spray painted that in the basement. I think that was probably one of the only things that could have really been seen. So we took advantage of
what
that.
was there.
And maybe that's what influenced the spray paint in the Astor and Sydney, maybe. But yeah, it's like, for me, the reason we could make that for not much money was we had like a unique, interesting cinematic location. We embraced limited natural lighting. We shot with only 1 focal length. That was a decision we made early on, so we only had the money to rent 1 lens, so we just devised our whole shot list around using 1 lens, and that completely like impacted how we filmed it. Is lots of like the camera's handheld always like moving forward. We couldn't do like any zooms or anything like that, and just embrace what that lens does versus trying to like make it do things it doesn't do well, and limited crew. But also having that 1 lens and only keeping that like saves time, because you're not changing lenses for like every single shot. So like if you really want to like save, basically making a movie is trying to use your time most efficiently for it to be going towards like the creative side, and the less money you have, the less time you have. The less time you have trying to find ways to be actually filming versus like doing all this stuff that you do between filming to set up a new shot, because when you have less people to do it, it's going to take longer and longer. So simplifying and leaning more into like, I don't know.
Using what's there.
Yeah, versus like getting too caught up in what you don't have. But at the same time, all of our movies are like trying to push beyond our budget as much as we possibly can.
Yeah.
But they all do that because we found good locations. Location.
Questions from anyone?
Yes, Peter.
Yeah. How do you like walk the balance between like this is corny and doing too much and making something that's boring?
Gosh, that is a good question.
You usually regret it a year later, where you landed. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you try your best and then you see all your mistakes after the fact. I don't know. I think
I think it's like oh, sorry, you're gonna say.
No, go ahead.
What we were talking about before of like, you can't really know how other people are gonna feel. You just have to trust your own like storytelling instincts and sensibilities, and trust that what you like is good. Or that, like I said, if you like it, there's people out there that will like it, and it's definitely, I think it's about just respecting and trusting your own sensibilities and what you like. It's really all you can do when it comes to like making those kinds of decisions. And then a lot of time, like, it's really, so much of it is about like just trying to make things better and fixing your mistakes. So there are lots of choices you're going to be making that, like, I think the most important thing is like showing it to other people, because like what you think is the worst thing in the world is maybe not even noticeable to anyone else, and you might over course correct. And so trying to like find those places, and it's really good to take a step back and take time away so that you can like then look back at it a little more objectively than when you're so stuck on like whatever mistake you felt like you made at the time. We're usually forced to edit. Well, we're not forced. We try to make a festival deadline really quickly and edit really fast. So I think all of our movies, I wish I could have
spent longer.
Yeah, taken a little break before like picture locking and stuff.
I think the other part of it that goes into that is like when you're making something and you're making choices, I think it's important to kind of lean in to what the project is asking for, and like if you're gonna do it, like really do it. Go big or go home. I think we kind of each of our films are pretty different from each other because each time we were really wanting to try something, and I think that's important because every time you try something different, you learn something more.
Right.
How do you always write with budget in mind, knowing your limitations, or do you ever just write like, let me just go as big as possible, and then maybe creatively I'll be able to figure out how to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's a question we're dealing with right now when it comes to writing features. I think our approach is usually try to start without putting too big of parameters on it.
Yeah.
And like write the like completely like what you have in your head, perfect version of it, and then like start to assess what we're capable of like raising, pulling off, and then seeing like where we can realistically push things and get more out of our budget, and then realizing where trying to push that would compromise the rest of the movie and maybe it'd fall apart because you tried to do something that just wasn't totally feasible. But like the budget is so in mind at every step of the process. With the Thaw, there's lots of shots we had to like let go of at so many different stages because it's like we just couldn't pull this off.
Yeah, but I do think in the writing stage, particularly with features, which I haven't written in a while, I think it's important to kind of write the movie that you, in a dream world, the movie you would make. I think write that movie and then see how close you can get to it. That's kind of how I feel.
And then you'll find when you get through other drafts that like you can always pull more out of your first drafts without compromising like the real essence of the movie. Mm-hmm. You can lose stuff that you never would have thought you could lose, and then you see the final movie and it's like it never needed those kinds of things. So it's like even when we made the Thaw, we went into every day with I think 2 or 3 like shots or scenes that we had decided ahead of time if we didn't have time to pull off, we could lose. And that was like one of those things, like maybe we never even needed to write them, but also it would have been cool to get them. So like we wrote what we wanted and realized later that maybe we didn't need it. So you could start big and just keep narrowing, I think is definitely the advice. But also like from a budget perspective, I think that's a really good thing to think about, is trying to think about those things ahead of time before you're on set. Because we made those choices ahead of time because we knew if we were on set, it would have been a lot emotionally more charged and difficult to be like, no, we have to cut this scene, and then we'd be like really sad about like losing it in the moment where we were mentally prepared, because we knew our schedule was so tight and it was never going to be possible to film everything. And if we were in denial about that, it could have spiraled emotionally, because so much of filmmaking is just like your own emotional, mental health and being in a good mental space so you can communicate to everyone else. And if you get lost in your head and then can't communicate, then like everything kind of crumbles.
Yeah, and I think if you have the ability to kind of visualize the final edit and imagine the shots that you would lose in a cut, the shots that might not be, you might not need to see your character walking down the hallway before getting into the room. Think about that stuff ahead of time, and it'll save you time on the day.
I guess while we're on budget, like to what degree are you guys self-financed? And like obviously in a perfect world, you're never spending a dime of your own money on anything. But obviously this real life doesn't really turn out that way. But in the past, I mean, have you guys stumbled on any kind of creative methods to raise funding, or like or lucked out in any way that could maybe be like constructive?
We have had a couple of successful crowdfunding campaigns for a couple of the short films, which is a ton of work. Crowdfunding is possible, but it's like a full-time job to like really do it. So if you have the time to devote to that, you can have a good campaign, and we can show examples of our campaigns. That being said, we were partly self-financed on some of these films. Sean did some like freelance work that helped fund parts of films. Credit cards help fund films, and parents help fund films. So if you are lucky enough to have those kinds of resources, that's a lot of the times, sadly, what it comes down to. It's a privilege.
And other parts of funding those films, especially the earlier ones, was friends, just working with friends. Favors, lots of favors, exchanging favors, finding those kind of like personal relationships that can help you extend the budget. And I'd also say on top of the crowdfunding, saying that it is possible, but it's not like magic. I think people maybe think when they start a crowdfunding campaign that it's going to go like beyond their community and their sphere. And I would highly suggest Seed and Spark if you're going to do film crowdfunding, because they have like a lot of like online classes and tutorials, and also will like actually look at your project and give notes on it and give really great, strong suggestions. And even as much to like, we wanted to launch ours in December, and they're like, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't launch it till like mid-January at the earliest, so that like people have money to give to you. Like something as simple as that was something that they really helped give to us. And one of the biggest things they're gonna say is like, the people you're gonna raise money from are your friends and family. It's really rare to get outside of that sphere. And I think we raised about $20,000 for the Thaw through Seed and Spark, and we raised probably half of that, and the other half was from one of our producers that was very committed to the project, and it's like,
and really tapped into his network for the film.
Yeah, and like just the mental preparation of like how bad it's going to feel to be asking for money over and over
all
again,
day, every day,
for a month straight. It's a lot. But I definitely suggest we built to that like much bigger budget, and starting smaller and keep like getting more ambitious and building to the point where you have the skills to pull off that bigger, more ambitious idea before, like instead of doing it maybe before you're ready. At the same time, Eggers talks about how like if he waited to make The Northman until he was ready, he never would have made it because he was never going to be ready. Yeah. And we can say the same thing about The Thaw. We were not ready to make that. It was going beyond like what we had done at that point, and there is an element of like the balance of like trying to tackle something maybe you're not totally ready for, but it's a great learning experience always for the next one.
And a growing opportunity. I would say to know what you're asking for, know what you have to offer, and know what the ask is. Because if you're asking, a group of friends to help you out for one day and you're willing to pay them a pizza, then it's a kind of fair trade. If you're asking a crew of 20 to 23 professionals to spend 16 hours a day in the snow,
It wasn't 16.
I'm exaggerating. It's there has to be a fairness there.
And then there's just at some point, it's going to get to a point of like how much money you're comfortable putting into your own project.
Yeah. You're never going to make money from short films, unfortunately.
Once the film is done and you're ready to do something with it, how do you build a plan for getting it to the public, putting it through film festivals? How do you select which film festivals to submit to?
I always suggest finding a short film that feels like similar. It's really a lot. There's a much more kind of like concrete path in the horror space than like the non-horror space. So like, you want to submit to horror festivals, I suggest going on my Instagram and seeing all the festivals that the Thaw played at and like submitting to all those, and then you can like Google like best horror film festivals, and there's different, like Movie Maker has like, they stopped doing it a few years ago, but they had like a top 50 horror film festival list.
Still pretty accurate.
Dead Central kind of took it over, but didn't do it last year. And then there's this one guy that compiles like all these different lists into like a 300 festival list and like kind of ranks them in order. So like that's kind of where I would go, where I went to find like where I wanted to submit for horror festivals. If you're making stuff outside of horror, I don't really have that much recommendations beyond like doing your due diligence to find which ones are not legitimate.
Yeah, there are a lot of scam festivals. So.
Well, I was going to say, because it costs money to submit to a lot of festivals.
Yeah.
So you're not going to submit to 300 film festivals because it's the top list, right? Like how amongst that list you decide this is what I'm going to spend $40 or $50 to pay the submission fee to?
Do you think the other aspect is like what ones you're actually going to attend in person? That's probably a big piece of it, because that's what.
Not for us, because we can't afford to go to that.
Yeah.
Mainly because we usually try to spend our money on the movie, and there's definitely other filmmakers that devote more of their budget to going to film festivals and stuff, and that's great for them.
Must be nice.
I sometimes see like, I don't know how you're going to every film festival. I'm very jealous, and you still made this big expensive movie. It's kind of like, I don't even know, it's arbitrary. Like sometimes I like.
It can feel arbitrary, but I think you can also look at, a film that's similar to the one that you made and what its run looked like and where it played and where it didn't play. And that can be pretty telling. Like if you're doing like a horror comedy, there are some festivals that are going to appreciate that more than others. So like thematically, you can look at festivals past years and the kinds of films that they like to program and submit a little more strategically to make your dollars go further. Because I do recommend, if you're planning on the release of your film to be a festival run, that has to be part of your budget. It just unfortunately does. It costs money.
Yeah, and I would say that like one thing we always talk about with festivals that was really eye-opening for me in a class I took is that like if you get into 30% of film festivals you submit to, that's a really, really good high number, which means if you want to play at 30 film festivals, you probably need to submit to 90, and 90 times 40 automatically gets you to
too much money.
$500. Yeah, so like it does have cost, and a lot of times it is that kind of like weighing like wanting to submit to everything versus what I can afford
versus what's realistic.
And then there's another element of like a lot of film festivals, they don't need world premieres, but they like state or city premieres. So you'll be looking at like all the horror festivals in Atlanta or Georgia, and you kind of going to decide which one you want to try to get the most, and then you have the backup in case you don't get into that one. It's a lot like college. You have your pushes and your safeties, and you're trying to like, and then your world premiere, you're usually trying to get like a big push. But there's also the path of like starting smaller and building with shorts. That's
important.
more because that's what we did with Water Horse. We well, we built to Fantastic Fest versus the Thaw we premiered at Fantastic Fest, and it was a very different experience from the festival
So
side.
once you start submitting to festivals and being accepted at festivals, you start building those relationships, and you're more likely to get in as an alum.
Yeah. There's it's really political. It's not just like how good your movie is, and especially with horror movies, I always say that like there's probably like 50 to 70 really, really, really good horror shorts made every year, and every like horror festival can probably program 25 to 30, and you just throw those 70 up in the air, and they just randomly fall in festivals depending on the programmer's tastes and stuff like that. And then if you're trying to get in the festivals outside of the horror circuit, you only have like, if you're lucky, they do like a genre block, so you only have like 7 chances to get in. So that obviously does not give you a very like probability chance. Another really good thing about film festivals is keeping your movies short. The shorter your movie is, the way more programmable it is. They always want to program 3 5-minute movies over a 15-minute movie. The Thaw was 16 minutes, which was like really, really scary because we knew we were going to have a harder time with a longer movie. And that thought, like that movie easily could have been 20, 25 minutes. And like every creative choice we made was to keep it as condensed and as possible to like increase our festival. It's unfortunately you have to think about that stuff. It's not just the creative side. If your goal is film festivals, which with shorts is really the only avenue, because even like distribution, like we're going to be an altar next year, like you don't probably get the recognition you need to get an altar unless you go through the film festival circuit, and that's definitely how like other producers see your movie. We met the actresses from the Thaw where we met on film festivals with other movies, and yeah, it does get easier to get into them as you make more because you've already made those connections. You can be an alum. Being an alum basically gets you watched by the programmer instead of the 2 random people that are volunteering to be someone who just rates a movie. Like anything you can do to get to the front without like making it seem like you're skipping the line, because some film festival programmers are really like yeah. It takes personality to run a film festival because it's really hard and time consuming, and those personalities can come out in lots of different interesting ways. So it's a lot of people navigation, and you could talk about film festivals forever. They're weird, important things.
And I think we're at time, but you know, I guess if people want to mingle a bit, is that okay, Cedar, in chat? Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you all for coming.
But stay short. That's one thing. Save's only 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like
5 minutes.
That's another way it can not cost that much money.